As we've seen previously on Murder of Crows, Wales, the finest country in the world and home to the most mercenary cat in feline history, is not immune to violent crime. When people grow up with the deck stacked against them, some people push back against it and succeed, in spite of how they started their life journey. Others, well, not so much. An awful lot of people who came from nothing often drift into drugs as a coping strategy, and low-level crime as an easy way out of financial hardship and to pay for their drug habit, only to find themselves trapped in a cycle of prison and halfway houses. It is someone with a foot in both camps of drugs and offending that will be our protagonist today, and in his crosshairs will be a young, naive and vulnerable woman who has been trapped in a different cycle, that of bad boys and coercive control. When these two worlds meet, it never ends well. But in this case, it is particularly grotesque and barbaric. With all of this said, we're going to Blackwood in South Wales, and a decade back in time to 2014. This is the terrible death of Cerys Yemm, and this is Murder of Crows. As I may have mentioned once or twice before, I am blessed to live in a beautiful corner of the world. South Wales is largely rural and relatively unspoiled by the urbanisation that has blighted certain parts of the UK. Stunning scenery, wonderful and friendly people, and quite a lot of sheep make it generally tranquil and peaceful. Wales, and in particular South Wales, was hit hard by the death of the coal industry. So many towns and villages have become pretty run down, and there are areas of abject poverty. But there is also a make do and get on with it attitude and indefatigable spirit that reinforces my pride in being Welsh. But that's not to say that there aren't a few bad eggs. And Wales is as tormented by underlying elements of drugs and offending as anywhere else. Blackwood is a town in this mould. as a former mining town that has seen a decline in recent years alongside the death of the coal industry. Like many such towns, the Miners' Institute was a core part of the town. And even though the industry itself has faded, the Institute was and remains a community hub, even to this day. The town is the home of the Chartist Bridge, and also a Chartist statue to commemorate the struggle of the Chartists and their efforts to improve the lives of the working classes. Perhaps most importantly, Blackwood is the home of the Manic Street Preachers, who were at the forefront of a wave of Welsh rock bands making it in the mainstream, particularly during the indie years of the 90s. But the mysterious disappearance of Manic Street Preachers guitarist Rhys Evans in 1995 is probably a story for another day. And it was in Blackwood in 2013 that we would have found a 21-year-old shop worker named Cerys Yemm. Now at this time, Cerys was in a turbulent relationship with a ne'er-do-well called Jay, who was a rogue, but I would hazard not a particularly lovable one. Cerys and Jay had a roller coaster relationship for some time, with Cerys even having to take time in a woman's refuge for her own protection. But undaunted, their relationship rekindled in 2013, with the two deciding to take the huge step of moving in together. But Jay, as was his norm, was sent to prison, and Cerys went back to live with her mother, Paula Yemm, in Oakdale. Despite his regular brushes with the law and his controlling ways, Cerys was adamant that she would stand by Jay, and the couple were apparently planning a life together after he got released from prison. But difficulties would come from a fellow convict that Jay became acquainted with at Park Prison in Bridgend. It was here that Jay met 34-year-old Matthew Williams. I will go into more details about Matthew Williams later in the video. But for the sake of the chronology, it was at Park Prison that Jay met Matthew Williams and struck up something of a friendship. And they discussed Jay's relationship with Cerys, among the other chats that they had. Williams was released from Park Prison in October of 2014 after serving a 27-month sentence. When he was released, he was given details of a hostel service based at the Cerys Arms Hotel, named after the nearby river Cerys. And this was a place often used by ex-offenders trying to get back on their feet after rejoining society. This hostel is near several well-known Welsh places, but in terms of major towns with things to do and possible employment opportunities, the nearby larger places of note are Merthyr Tydfil and Blackwood, and Williams was born and raised in Blackwood, but also Williams was drawn to bigger towns like a moth to a flame, not least because he was an addict, and so could meet those needs more easily in bigger towns. And so it was that Matthew Williams began hanging around Blackwood and having nights out there. It was through the town of Blackwood, while bigger than towns like Ebbw Vale and Abertillery, Blackwood was still small enough to have only a relatively small pool of regular night spots for the cool kids. And so Cerys, Yemm and Matthew Williams happened to cross paths on a night out. And when they found out who the other was, and their common link being Jay, they decided to stay in touch. When Jay found out, knowing Williams and his ways a little better than the more naive Cerys, he warned her to stay away from him. Cerys and Williams began friendly enough, but Williams started to work his way further into Cerys's life, with their interactions becoming more and more flirty with time. Until, in the words later said by William's friend Rhodri Moore, they were acting like boyfriend and girlfriend. Now this could be seen as natural progression of a friendship towards a relationship, but this happened within less than 2 weeks of Williams being released from prison. Jesus Christ on a very nice mountain bicycle. It's a red flag to begin with, isn't it? But then came November the 5th, 2014. On that day, Rhodri Moore went to pick up Cerys Yemm from her home, with her telling her mum she would be back that evening, and she thought it would be no later than 11:30 p.m. Then Cerys, Rhodri and Matthew Williams spent the day drinking lager and smoking cannabis at Rhodri Moore's home. But Cerys did not return home that evening as was planned. Instead, she went back to the Cerys Arms hostel with Williams. Well, shitty brickety, probably not the best idea that she had ever had. That night and into the early hours of the next morning, Other residents of the hostel described hearing screaming coming from his first floor bedroom at around 1 a.m, 1:10, something like that. Residents understandably complained to management, and the hotel owner, Mandy Miles, did not get any response when she tried to contact Williams through the door. So she decided to make entry into the room, and she was met with a traumatizing and horrific scene. Cerys Yemm was lying on the floor of the room. She was covered in blood and bruises and seemed to be missing an eye. On first impressions, she believed that Williams had attacked Cerys and was now seemingly attempting to eat her. This would later be found not to be correct. But as we'll discover, Cerys' injuries, including several bite marks, could easily have given this impression on initial viewing, particularly with Williams looming over Cerys' body, claiming she's not a girl, and acting quite animalistically. Mandy Miles described the scene as a bloodbath and like something from a horror film. She reported that it looked like Williams had attacked Miss Yemm with a screwdriver and was eating her. But the findings of a post-mortem examination did not support that. Home Office pathologist Richard Jones later said that he carried out the post-mortem on Cerys and found 24 separate areas of injury, which included at least 89 separate injuries that he could count, with him saying the injuries were either blunt force bruises or grazes, or they were sharp force, which is essentially cutting, or a mixture of the two. And then there were 3 or 4 injuries which were a special sort of injury, that being a bite mark. He said that there were injuries to the eyes, including the removal of the left eye, nose, ears, and mouth, with the injuries to the mouth being the most serious. Jones said the mouth injuries resulted in both of the facial arteries being severed, which would have caused rapid loss of blood and consciousness. A puncture of the left jugular vein would have also contributed to the rapid blood loss. Jones said that Cerys' cause of death was sharp force trauma to the head and neck, causing external and internal blood loss. He said he had x-rayed Cerys' body to look for metal fragments, such as the tip of a knife. But he did not find any, nor did he find evidence that a screwdriver had been used in the attack, as was reported to police by Mandy Miles. Jones confirmed that no parts of her body were missing, and said he had no evidence of her being eaten. Police arrived at around 1:35 a.m. and used force to restrain Williams, which included the use of a taser. PC Alan Cotterill later said that Williams looked possessed when he confronted him in the hotel room following a 999 call. Williams was ultimately tasered 4 times, according to the officer. Williams was arrested and later died. PC Cotterill said, "I have never been more scared in my entire life. I spoke to him, but he was looking possessed. There was an angry sort of look, and his eyes were almost all black." The policeman understood that firearms officers were engaged to use deadly force if required, adding that there had been a discussion about whether the taser-trained officers should go into the room or just contain the scene, protecting the room from people coming in and going out, and waiting for the firearms officers. PC Cotterill said he knew Williams was a rather large, violent male, and he shouted at him that he was armed and that he should move away from Cerys Yemm's body. But Williams lay on the floor, snarling and growling, as he refused to listen. The PC then decided to fire his taser at Williams, holding it for 7 seconds instead of the usual 5-second charge. This seemed to have no effect, as Williams started to try to get up again, lifting up the officers as if we weren't even there. And PC Cotterill followed this up by saying, "In my opinion, he was trying to get to his feet to carry on the attack. He would have caused further damage to Miss Yemm, and we would have been struggling to restrain and contain him." 3 more taser shots were fired, one of which hit him between the eyes. Williams was then arrested at the scene and later died. Paramedics confirmed that Cerys Yemm was dead at the scene, and although efforts were made to resuscitate Williams, he was pronounced dead in an ambulance just before 2:20 a.m. A pathologist later concluded that Williams' death was sudden and unexpected following his tasering and restraint, and noted his history of drug use, as well as his struggle with the police. So both murder victim and murderer were already dead in just one night. And indeed, in just over 2 hours since the two had left the home of Rhodri Moore. But as well as being a known addict, there was plenty in William's background history to suggest significant issues and red flags on his character. As the eldest of 4 brothers, Matthew Williams grew up in Blackwood, where he lived with both parents until they divorced when he was 10 years old. Hard to say whether this was a trigger, but his life spiraled into a world of drug use and violence at a very, very early age. At the age of 11, he started smoking cannabis, and 2 years later he was expelled from school for fighting. And by the age of 15, he had dropped out of the school system altogether. He knew that he needed help for his drug abuse as a teenager, and he did seek it out. But he failed to control his habit, and a path of prolific offending followed, resulting in his first custodial sentence in a young offenders institute at just 15. In total, he notched up 26 convictions for 78 offences, including assault, wounding with intent, drugs and weapons offences. 41 of his crimes resulted in juvenile custodial sentences, while 14 others saw him spend time in adult facilities. Alongside his offending, his drug use was impacting his mental health. He was first referred to mental health services in April 1997 after being charged with burglary and attempted theft. But his admission to TCRW, acute mental health inpatient unit in Blackwood, was a very short one, as he broke its drug-free policy and left after being found using cannabis just 2.5 hours after being admitted. His criminal activity and drug use continued, and he spent time yo-yoing in and out of jail. In 2004, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and was admitted into a psychiatric unit under the Mental Health Act. He spent 5 weeks at the unit until his discharge into care under the Caerphilly-based community mental health team. But that particular support ended in February 2005, when yet again he was jailed, this time for 5 years for burglary, theft and wounding offences. Further burglary offences led to another jail term in 2009. On release, he was referred to a community psychiatric nurse. But just 1 year later, the sessions ended because he had not shown any signs of a psychotic illness. During later prison stays, he was prescribed medication after experiencing mental health issues, including hearing voices, having hallucinations, and paranoid ideas. And his symptoms, or the reduction of them, were not helped by Williams not always taking his medication. In fact, he quite routinely refused it, claiming he did not want it, and that it caused him side effects, plus he did not believe it was helping. His prescription was eventually stopped in 2014 after an absence of reported psychotic symptoms, and he was reported as functioning well, holding down a job as a prison barber, before his release in October of the same year. His behaviour in prison in the run-up to his release was described as pleasant, polite, and with a high level of functioning. Having served his full 27-month sentence, he was released from HMP Park without the statutory need for supervision, without medication, and without a referral to Caerphilly's community mental health team. And so it was that Matthew Williams ended up in a hostel near his childhood hometown of Blackwood, with minimal support and no supervision. He really was a ticking time bomb. When he began staying at the hostel, he was assessed by homelessness charity staff to find out his housing needs. The charity worker said that Williams was quiet, having strange eyes, and seemed sad, but concluded that overall he was doing very well. There was no further contact because Williams failed to contact the charity again. And others who came into contact with him during the 2 weeks that he was out of prison reported him as being in a low mood and pessimistic about his future. But having said that, they also said that he did not display any psychotic symptoms or signs of mental illness. His GP said that he showed no signs of schizophrenia the week before the attack, and said he appeared smart and that he seemed pretty well. But those who knew him also revealed that he took amphetamines almost daily in the lead up to the attack, which experts said had likely brought on a condition called excited delirium, symptoms of which included insensitivity to pain, no response to verbal commands, growling animal noises, and unusual strength. All of these signs were exhibited by Williams during and after the fatal attack. With Cerys and Williams both dead, this was never a case that would see the inside of a criminal courtroom. But in order to unravel and examine the deaths of Cerys, Yemm and Matthew Williams, an inquest was conducted beginning in March of 2017 in Newport. Senior Coroner David Bowen told Gwent Coroner's Court that the inquest would explore what role the circumstances of Williams' release played in the savage murder, with him saying at the time, "We will explore whether relevant agencies knew about the risks surrounding his release and what steps were taken. We will look at his mental health. We will also explore what assessments were made as to the risks of further offending and violence." On the 5th of April 2017, the jury concluded a decision of unlawful killing in the case of Cerys Yemm. The jury also gave the conclusion of sudden unexpected death through a combination of illicit drug use and restraint for Matthew Williams. The medical cause of death given for Cerys Yemm was sharp force trauma to the face and neck. They added, probably quite redundantly, that she suffered from violent injuries. The medical cause of death given for Matthew Williams was sudden unexpected death following a restraint, including the use of a taser, in a man with a history of drug use.
Beautiful daughter Cerys, who was kind, caring and could always see the best in people. Cerys tragically lost her life in November 2014 when Matthew Williams killed her whilst he was in a psychotic state through illegal drug abuse. inquest, we've been searching for answers to our questions as to how the murder, which has so devastated our family, could take place in the heart of our community, and why the agencies responsible for protecting the public from violent offenders could not prevent this awful event from occurring. We will never know whether more timely intervention by the police might have saved Cerys' life that night. It was distressing to hear that when fellow residents were asking to go into Williams's room to protect her, there was confusion in the police control room. We've heard evidence that due to delays and errors in 2 criminal investigations, one which included threats to kill, those prosecutions did not proceed, and Williams was released from prison in October 2014, when he should have been in custody awaiting justice. We feel that there should be reform of the systems of monitoring and information sharing between agencies when offenders are released from prison. We have heard that relevant Welsh Government guidance on rehousing offenders was not followed, even though Williams had said he wanted to make a fresh start out of the area. In fact, he was accommodated in an unsuitable B&B hostel in Algoid, where he resumed his cycle of drug abuse. We feel that there is still a risk today that offenders will be housed together with vulnerable or young people in the same establishments without the local community around them having any idea of the danger that they pose. We also call upon Caerphilly County Borough Council to fully implement the recommendations of the Health Inspector at Wales Review, and to also work with the proprietor of the Sahawi Arms Hotel to demolish the site, which at present serves as an unbearable reminder of the loss of Cerys.
Firstly, we repeat our sincere condolences to Cerys' family for the dreadful and tragic events of the 6th of November 2014. In participating in this inquest, we have not sought to excuse our son's actions, but have tried to understand them. In the aftermath of the killing, there were allegations of cannibalism in the press. It has been agreed that they were unfounded. Matthew was a very troubled man with significant mental health difficulties, made worse by drug abuse. He had needed long-term support and treatment for many years, but this was not available either in prison or in the community. We are also surprised that the health board at Abertawe Bournemouth Daniels chose to play no part in this process. In our view, the evidence exposed clear failings in the mental health, housing and criminal justice system, and we regret that the jury were not given the opportunity by the coroner to express their view on these issues. We hope that this case will highlight the need for better mental health care and lead to the effective sharing of information between state agencies, and that another family will not have to go through what the families touched by this inquest have had to.
Following the conclusion of the inquest, Labour and Cooperative MP for Islwyn, Rhys Evans, said that it was still unclear why Williams was released, despite remaining a threat to society. He called for probation officers to be given more power over released offenders. He also said, and I quote, "Overall, this case shows that there must be reform of the probation service. The probation service was simply unable to force Mr. Williams to take the support that he required because he had served out his full sentence. This has to change, and former prisoners must be required to undergo monitoring, or at the very least treatment, until officers are confident that they no longer pose a threat to society." And that was the case of Matthew Williams' dramatic change of attitude towards Cerys Yemm. Since, until the attack, the two had been extremely friendly and had been growing ever closer. Was this situation preventable? Perhaps, but only really with the benefit of hindsight. The lack of support and supervision for Matthew Williams was concerning, but I don't think anyone, even with knowledge of Williams' past, could have predicted quite how suddenly and violently he would or could change. That said, Williams was unquestionably bad news, and Cerys should perhaps have taken longer to get to know Williams before being alone with him. Now, this is absolutely not victim blaming. Cerys definitely did not in any way deserve what happened to her. I am just trying to use her situation in terms of lessons people need to learn for the future. Here, 2 lives were lost, but it is only Cerys Yemm that I dedicate this episode to, since in my view she was the only true innocent whose life was cut desperately short in this brutal tragedy. I send love and condolences to her friends and family. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. Please hit that subscribe button. I get a little quiver of excitement every time somebody presses it. But with that said, I'm Steve. This bowl of fluff is Samson. You are, aren't you? And we will see you when we see you.
Say that you're ready.